And we are live. Welcome, everybody. It's Masterclass time. We are going to talk today about implementing verification of payee today. The first step in fighting payment fraud. Masterclass because we're gonna talk about practical implementations, practical use cases, but also in the wider sense, payment fraud, how we can use this. My name is Patrick Koens. I will be moderating this webinar today as founder from Treasury Masterminds. And I'm very pleased with my panel of speakers because they're both experts on this topic and they can tell you everything about VoP. They're going to introduce themselves later. We have Guillermo, EACT board member, treasurer, and VoP expert, all in one sentence. And we have Cyrille, the head of strategy and operations from Trustpair. Can you quickly introduce yourself, Guillermo? Let's start with you.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. My name is Guillermo de la Fuente. I'm Spanish and Swiss with 35 years of experience in treasury in different environments, international organizations, multinationals, banks, trade companies, and also the voice of the European Treasury Association in forums like the European Banking Authority, the Banking Stakeholding Group, and GLAIF, the Global Legal Entity Identification Foundation, where I'm co-chairing the vendors group and also representing the European Treasury Associations at the Global Coalition for Fighting Financial Crime.
Great. Thanks, Guillermo. Cyrille?
Yeah, thanks. So good morning, everyone. So Cyrille de La Brunetière. So I'm Trustpair Chief Operations Officer. I've been with Trustpair for 4 years. In terms of background, well, got 15 years in experience in strategy consulting, corporate banking, and other tech companies. And yeah, really happy to be here today to go through this VoP webinar and potentially answer any of the questions that the audience might have regarding VoP coming up.
Yes, thanks for that. Quick note to the audience, there is room for questions at the end, but you can already put the questions in the comment sections. We will see them, we will read them. If it makes sense to post these questions to the panel directly, we will we will ask them immediately. And try to cover as much as possible. Some of you also sending questions while registering. Thanks a lot for that. We've incorporated most of them in the questions we're going to ask. So that's. But without further ado, let's dive into it. We have 45 minutes for this session. Let's start with you, Guillermo. Most of the listeners will probably know what VoP is and how it works. But just for setting the stage, can you explain the concept of VoP and why it's a key measure in fraud prevention, in your opinion?
Yes. As you say, Patrick, I think at this stage, most of the people knows what verification of payee is, or some people know it as a confirmation of payee as well. It's basically something as simple as matching the beneficiary with the bank account holder. That's as simple as that. It's a check, an extra check that has to be performed by banks. We can talk about financial institutions, but I think we are all talking about banks when we talk about treasury or corporate treasury payments mainly. So yeah, it's just the match of those two factors, which uh, surprisingly was not done in the past. In the SEPA, in the PSD2 regulation, there was not contemplated this check. So the payments were executed in the SEPA and in most of the countries in the world, just with the IBAN number, with the bank account number. And at the beginning, that was not a big issue, but it became um, uh, something a fail in the system, and the fraudster took advantage of that failure, and they start making a lot of attempts of fraud, and that became the number one threat for online payment for corporates.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Cyrille, then over to you. Of course, VoP is one of the measures you use at Trustpair in the wider approach of fraud prevention. But where does VoP sit in that approach? Is it an end of line? Is it at the beginning? Is it just one of the few tools?
Yeah.
Enlighten us.
Yeah, no, thanks, Patrick. Very good question. Honestly, I mean, the way, and to start on corporate, payment fraud, the way we see it in Trustpair, it's a game of absolute precision when you want to prevent fraud, meaning that it's a market, or it's a business, or it's a job, depending on the way how you want it, where zero mistake is accepted. I mean, on our end, that's the way we see it. We can't really say, for example, to a client that we are trying to protect against fraud, we are 96% sure that you can make that multi-million-dollar payment to your supplier. We need to be absolutely sure. And the way we approach it at Trustpair is that we bring in a combination of deterministic, so really important, to be sure, binary answers. We bring a combination of deterministic methods, and external sources using banking data is the first of them. So in that prospect, and we think VoP is a very positive move in Europe, because first of all, it's bringing the spotlight on that vendor fraud payments issue. It's also pushing up for opening for the opening of more data in some European countries where banking data is not available in a lot. And basically, the way we see VoP is one of the inputs, one of the sources that we will be able to use as Trustpair, to validate bank account ownership. It won't be comprehensive. I mean, we're probably going to talk through that with Guillermo during the webinar, but it's definitely, a step forward and a massive additional source that we will be able to leverage as one of the methods that we are using. So we have banking sources, we have algorithms that we can use as well using proprietary data. We also have what we call complementary methods, callbacks, micropayments, or penny drops. So all these methods together, deterministic and stacked, one after the other, bring what we think is the maximum level of security. And we are definitely, welcoming VoP as a major source covering, European countries, especially I'm thinking of countries like Germany or Spain, where, local coverage by banking data so far wasn't great. So this is definitely going to push for better coverage.
Okay, so you're saying we don't have 100% data coverage yet in Europe on bank account data?
So yeah, so maybe to elaborate on that, and I think Guillermo explained that really well. VoP is basically matching the name of the beneficiary with the name of the account holder that the bank have in their data, and obviously on that VoP, the regulation should push all the banks to make that data available. So we should have 100% of the data. The question that we are asking is, does that data make you able as a client to validate 100% of your vendor? And I mean, we're going to go through that in a bit more detail, but name matching, checking the ownership via name matching has some limitations. And what we've seen in other countries like the UK, where similar initiatives have been implemented, is that you can have 30 to 40% of cases where name matching isn't enough to validate totally the ownership of the bank accounts. But maybe we'll go through that in a minute, I guess,
Yes,
when we
definitely.
go through more details.
Yes, definitely. Before we go into the practical implications, Guillermo, to you. In my opinion, I've been using VoP a lot already. I'm from the Netherlands. We had it for years, but that's a single payment. I enter it in my banking platform. I get the check in, which I love because it gives me trust, and then I send it. But that's very end of line. Just before I send it, it's checked, which is amazing. But of course, that's customer to customer, peer to peer. For big corporates, it's going to work differently. Can you explain how this VoP will work for big corporates, bulk payments, much more payments, and how is it different to C2C?
Yeah, this is. I think this is the most important thing. I have to say that because I'm representing corporate treasurers, and I think this regulation, the the VoP regulation. I'm not gonna talk too much about that. It came with the instant payments regulation for the first time. Now, as you know, this obligation of verification of payee is extended to a standard credit transfer as well, not just to instant payments. But just to give a little bit of background in this regulation, the European Corporate Treasury Association had the opportunity to participate, and we did it very actively. And thanks to that, I think we took the opportunity to fix the problem that I mentioned before, which was the vulnerability of not of making payments only with an IBAN number, and was a kind of fraud, a kind of a scam that the fraudsters were really taking advantage of it and getting really spread all across the world. So the association, the European Corporate Association, was actively involved in this regulation, and we insist in having the verification of payee for corporate, for business as well. I mean, and not just for retailing or for consumers, but also for corporates, and that was really not that simple, because when you talk to the European officials, the delegations, they see consumers as the individuals. They don't see consumers as corporates. But the fact that the European Association was involved in the process, in the hearings, also in the consultation, that was a big milestone. And thanks to that, I'm very proud of what we achieved, which is basically getting the verification of payee everywhere, not just in instant payment, but also standard payment. And the three main conditions, or the main three factors that we been asking for to keep in the regulation was, first of all, to be for free. We wanted that this this additional check will be done for free with no additional charges from the payment providers. And also the second point was to have the access to the mass batches or the mass payment files. And the third point that wanted to add, that we've been fighting for it in the 2 or 3 years that they took the regulation, was the inclusion of the legal entity identifier, the single legal identifier in the payment instruction as a check, as a way to avoid the ambiguity, and as a way to avoid close match or negative some problems that could be arised when making mass payment files. So this is in a nutshell what has been accomplished from the European Treasury Association.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
and maybe just to elaborate on that, and maybe for people listening or watching us, and I think, Patrick, you mentioned the example of B2C. You're in your banking app, you send out a transfer, and then the check is done automatically. Very practical, no objection with that. That's probably the best way to do it. The thing with, obviously, corporate treasury is that you're sending out, as Guillermo said, batch payments, right? So you're sending out payment files, and the way it's going to work practically is that you're sending out your file, with your, I don't know, let's say 100 payments that you need to do in your campaign, and you're going to receive from the bank an answer, right? A response, so a file with, in front of, on each payment line, you're going to receive the VoP results, like, total a perfect match, no match, or close match. The problem with that is that obviously you can't remove the cases where you get a close match and a no match. And as we've seen in previous countries, doing the same type of regulations, it's around name, based on name matching, is around 30 or 40% of close match or no match that you get. So the practical question that VoP is asking to treasurers is, how do you manage these payment campaigns, where you get not all, not all the payments are in errors, but you get a few errors. Like, do you cancel the whole campaign and go back to check again? Because you can't remove, the single error or close match payments. So this is, I think, one of the practicality limitations, and I mean, really happy to hear your thoughts on that, Guillermo. That we saw, straight away, and the feedback we got straight away from treasurers on the market. Like, this is going to be complicated to manage. I think that's one of the reasons why you have the opt-out option, available for corporates to untick the box and say to their bank, we don't want to do VoP controls on our payments, and we take the responsibility for that. But that's kind of the issue we're seeing on the corporate markets for that.
Yeah, and that basically means, Cyrille, that I, as a corporate, as a private person, I want to do it at the end. But as a corporate, I don't want to do VoP when sending the payment. I want to do VoP much earlier. I maybe want to do it on my database. I have an IBAN and a name in my master data. Can I do VoP on my master data? Can I do that, for example?
This is exactly when we been discussing all these regulations. You can imagine there was a lot of challenges, and we were aware that there were some solutions that had to be done in conjunction with the different stakeholders. I mean, we as corporate treasury, we didn't want to sit down and wait for solutions from the payment providers or the vendors specialized in fraud. So we knew that this gonna create some challenges, and we were ready to discuss this with everybody involved. I think fighting fraud is not just from banks; it's also from all the different actors in in the market. So we were aware that the solutions have to be found, a pragmatical solution have to be found, and we knew that the mass payments will bring some challenges, and but we believe that that will be the best solution, and I'm doing myself in my company, but I think most of my peers will keep doing the same, is to do what we call the pre-validation. The pre-validation uh, um, will help us to make a sanity check in our master data, and making sure that the banking information that we have in our systems are updated, are correct. There is no any mis direction of payment. There is no any attempt of fraud when we get a request from a new supplier, or a supplier existing supplier to change the bank account number. All these kind of things, I think, has to be done in advance. It has to be prepared well in advance, because at the end, as I always say, the verification of payee is an extra safety net. It's not the magical solution that will stop fraud in any organization. That will keep you an extra safety net that will help you to mitigate your payment fraud risk. But you have to work. You have to do things before. You have to maintain a database in updated, and making sure that you make a pre-validation. And this is where we we count on companies like Trustpair, which can help us on that direction. So when we send the batch payment file, we will be sure that there was not any rejections, and that will make our reconciliation easier. So this is basically what we expect now
Yeah.
from the new regulation.
Yeah, no, fully agree on that. And if I may elaborate, well, first thing, fully agree with Guillermo that, banks and vendors, I mean, providers like us are working hand in hand, and again, we see VoP as a very positive step. It's definitely going in the right direction. It's also addressing the consumer markets. We shouldn't, I mean, obviously today we're talking corporates, but we shouldn't forget that many, I don't know, retired people, get defrauded every day by people, by scammers, who are doing that. And obviously EU regulation think consumers first, and that's the way it's been designed. And as for the corporate, fully agree with Guillermo. It's the first step. Let's see how it goes, and we work hand in hand with the regulation. The other thing I wanted to maybe elaborate on is on the concept of pre-validation. That's exactly, I mean, obviously what we've been doing with Trustpair. So what we recommend is really as soon as you start working, onboarding a new vendor, or whenever some existing vendor, changes bank accounts, before, inputting that into your systems, you need to do a pre-validation. So fully agree with Guillermo on that. After that, the data is going to live in your systems, and you want to monitor your vendor master file, to make sure that nothing happens. It could be anything. It could be a cyber attack that you haven't seen. It could be, internal fraud. You might have someone having access to the systems and changing bank accounts without you noticing. It might be a data migration when you have a merger or acquisition, anything. So it's about doing the check upfront when you start working with someone before you input the data, monitoring the data when it lives in your systems, and that's very important. And the way we see the check right before the payments, it's a last, it's a double check to make sure that any payment that goes out goes to a vendor bank account that has been validated before. And if it hasn't been the case, I mean, the way we designed it at Trustpair is that it triggers a last minute control. And these cases, I mean, they are the ones that you see in the newspaper, right? The CEO fraud or the CEO scam. You get a phone call, an accountant gets a phone call from the CEO or the CFO or whoever. We have this very urgent transaction, secret transaction, last minute payments. Obviously, the person you're going to pay is not in the database. And that's exactly, so we have a module that we call the payment module in the solution that provides these last minute checks to make sure that no payments goes out without having been validated, including the off process payments. So that's really important. So yeah, I mean, fully agree with Guillermo. And I would say it's pre-validation, but it's only, it's also, monitoring across the whole procure to pay value chain. And and VoP is one of the ingredients. Obviously, the way it's been designed by the regulation is not super practical for treasurer, to say the least. But it's one of the ingredients for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense to do both. To do the pre-validation before I pay, so I'm not stressed on. And I was surprised by this 30-40% close and no match. I would expected this to be much lower, and I can imagine now the headaches of some treasurers.
Yeah, just if I may just think of a typical company, it's called company, I don't know, LTD, because you're in the UK, and then I don't know, you just forget the LTD. It's going to be a close match, right? So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It can happen very quickly. Or I don't know, Guillermo, and I see your last name, I see mine. We would struggle, having VoP on our, because you have different words. Just a little difference can create a close match. So that's kind of how it works. Name matching, it's an algorithm. It's not unfiable, and yeah, that's the name matching. Yeah, that's the way name matching works.
And that's the reason we fight for keeping the third condition, which, if you remember, was to use a single identity number, in this case the LEI, for corporates. But I mean, if you use identifiers instead of names, or brand names, that will make the task very easy. It will
Yeah,
be easy to read by a machine, and that will avoid any ambiguity. It will avoid any false positive, any close match. But this is the next step in the in the evolution. The key point I would like to say is, yes, we have to work together to find solutions and to fight crime and to fight payment fraud. And that's the good point from this, that we have now banks playing the role with the bank with the verification of payee. We have vendors bringing solutions, being very innovative, bringing not just verification of payee, but other solutions that will enhance the protection for corporate treasurers.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of a conclusion here, that do not trust fully on VoP, because 30-40% already, end of line is too late, start at the beginning, pre-validation, but even that combination can be tricky. I think you need this triangle on pre-validation, final step validation, also human interaction and logic. But I also think other fraud measures do not fully rely on VoP. I heard one example of a treasurer who had a case of a frauder opening a company called Amazon with an E at the end, in Lithuania somewhere. So they had an IBAN number, and they sent invoices for an Amazon with an E on it. So people thought it would have been Amazon. So they will successfully pass the VoP rule because the company name matches, and so it will eliminate. So fraudsters also adapt, and you have to keep adapting. So we need other fraud measures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point, Patrick. I'm sorry if I may. I mean, there's an even more famous example of Google and Facebook getting defrauded hundreds of millions to a company who had, I mean, in Lithuania, who had taken exactly the same name as a Taiwanese company, but I mean, at the letter, all letters matched. And that, I think that's another of our points, I mean, regarding VoP at Trustpair, is that we know context matters, right? It's not only about checking a name and, seeing that both names match, even in the case where you have a perfect match. You do need the context to know, where is the bank account located? Where is the company? Does it make sense? Is the bank account open in a digital bank? Does it make sense if you're paying a big corporate, entity? And so, I mean, I can speak for what we're doing at Trustpair, but basically at Trustpair, complementary to what we call the evaluation, which is basically giving the binary answer yes or no. We think we can actually certify that the bank account belongs to the vendor. In the complex cases that we have, because you always have complex cases where the banking data is not enough, VoP data is not enough, or even some of the complementary methods that we use don't manage to validate. In this case, what we do is we display the risk context to the customer, because we know that the customer, in some cases, maybe a very small minority of cases, is the best place to take the decision because they have the history with the vendor. They know the vendors, they have the contacts. They can always go back to the initial contact to make the verification themselves, but they need to have context, And as you said, Patrick, if you have just Amazon and obviously you might be using Amazon as a supplier, as many companies today, you're going to pay, and that's not going to be enough. You need more context. You need someone telling you, careful, that bank account is in Lithuania, something like that.
And that's what VoP is not going to do. I need other fraud measures. So what, Cyrille, what other fraud measures would you advise corporates?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, to quickly have a look at the techniques today, used by fraudster. The most common one is business email compromise, right? You hack a vendor email, you impersonate that vendor, and you send out, either a false bank account change request, or you send directly a false invoice, a modified invoice. You have very accessible softwares today using sometimes AI technology to create that from scratch. You have phone spoofing technique, right? The number that you see on, calling you is not the real number that is actually used by the fraudster. You have obviously the deep fake ones, which I think are quite famous because you got newspaper coverage on that. I think you had a case in Hong Kong a couple of years back, where the accountant paid to a panel of people in video conference where he thought he was speaking to the board of his company, and actually all these people were fake and created using deepfake techniques. So what we can see is that you have a whole range of techniques. We think at the end it comes back to really making a thorough check on the bank account ownership and also displaying additional context. So I can give you a practical example of what we do at Trustpair. So when the client wants to submit, on the platform, the invoice or the bank letter they received from their vendor to prove bank account ownership, we do have a tool that we use, using algorithms to check whether the document, the PDF, was modified, or altered by someone else. And that's kind of also how that provides you with additional context. It doesn't take the decision on behalf of the client, right? But it tells you, be careful because, that's a complex case. So unfortunately, no banking data could validate, or even through callbacks or the different methods that we're using, we couldn't manage to get a certified, ownership. However, we had a look at the document and that document is fake and has been modified. So then, it's up to you to take the decision. And we think that combining the both approaches, a solid evaluation, validating 80, 90% of the cases, depending on the geography, plus what we call case management, displaying context and, helping the clients, using different features that we have in the app to have a validation workflow, double validation workflow, making sure an accountant doesn't take the decision on their own. We think that the both approaches are the two legs of total security in your payments, and that's kind of what we're trying to provide. Again, VoP being one of the ingredients, helping us to make our evaluation even more comprehensive.
Yeah. No, fair point. And I see a comment in the chat from Vincenzo. It's part of the customer due diligence, which is a great comment. But often, with all fairness, this customer due diligence is done way down in AP teams, nothing like the head of treasury who knows everything about VoP and how it works and is quite IT savvy. It often happens very down in an AP department by some clerk who learned how to enter master data and they follow rules. So
Yeah.
I think it needs to be embedded there. Guillermo, any advice, tips, what you've seen with your clients on how to make sure it's embedded in your organization really, so we know we have the full toolkit: VoP, training, awareness of the whole AP teams.
That's a very good point, and I have to
Guillermo?
admit.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I have to admit that what I seeing in the late years is a lot of division on the way the payments are done, and I see mm, also a lot of activity coming from share centers with sometimes they are located in different countries or sometimes with different time zones. So that creates a lot of problems in terms of how do you centralize this, let's say, this activity of mitigated payment fraud. And I think it's important that in Treasury we keep an eye on that, and we're trying to lead that project and making sure that all the different stakeholders in the company are involved, not just accounts payable, not just Treasury, but also a lot of different stakeholders in the company. Otherwise, we will lose ground. And I have to tell you, I've seen that in my company, in one of the company I work lately. We have some fraud attempts because of that. So I think it's important that you pay attention to that. And I think Cyrille, Trustpair is very conscious of that, and that's something that is consider when you advise your customers on the implementations.
Yeah, and maybe I mean, and to elaborate on that, I mean, we think a couple of ingredients are really important to the point that you mentioned, Patrick, that sometimes, the process is scattered across different teams, and that's where, the flows can happen as well. I mean, the first ingredient is obviously expertise. We see many clients or prospects, when they engage with us in search of a solution and they say, oh yeah, no, I mean, we're looking for more efficiency, but we're fine. We have a setup with callbacks. We have internal people doing callbacks, accountants. Well, it might seem obvious, but it's not an accountant job to do a security callback to validate a bank account. So that might be obvious, but the first thing is that we think it's sometimes, valuable bandwidth, being wasted in, things that could be delegated to people having the expertise, of doing that over and over for years. Obviously, as Guillermo mentioned, you have shared service centers. So then in that case, you have an approach that is been a bit more industrialized. But again, the question is, I mean, when we discuss with clients and we start by asking them, what's your current process, if you have any, to prevent fraud? And sometimes we see flows like, incoming calls, validating by emails, validating physical documents. I just want to stress here for the people who are watching us, a signature doesn't certify anything, right? You can fake a signature. It's very easy. I think you should rather trust digital copies, PDFs that have been screened through a tool that tells you whether the PDF was altered or not. That's our approach, and that's what we're trying to push with the clients. So what we see is that we have many established practices, sometimes for years, and also sometimes from the old world, stamping documents, having physical signatures and stuff that are a bit outdated when we look at the techniques used today by fraudsters. So that's the first thing around expertise. The second one is, I think, having one source of truth, which is really important. We see, not all the time, but several times, competing controls being done at different places of the organization, right? Procurement does a control because they're supposed to. Then accounting takes over and they do it at the invoice level. And then maybe treasury, and I have to say it in some cases, doesn't really trust the process that is done at the accounting level and they do their own controls. So obviously you have a lot of double controls. So that's why it's really important to gather, all the data and all the controls monitoring, all the process monitoring in one place. So I think that's the second ingredient. And I would say the third ingredient, and obviously that's one thing we're pushing at Trustpair, but that's really important, is connectivity, right? All our corporate clients, they use, I mean, I don't want to say any brands, but they use big corporate softwares, treasury management systems, ERPs, procurement platforms. You want to embed, the controls within these platforms, right? Otherwise, you're creating, it might be harder to implement. And I mean, some of these corporates have very complex vendor onboarding workflows. Sorry. So you want to add, the bank account validation as one of the nodes of the overall workflow to create less disturbance as we can. So maybe, yeah, I would really stress these three ingredients, expertise, having, one source of truth, and also, connectivity to the existing tools, which is something really important.
Yeah, and you're saying fraud checks should be automated as much as possible on your master data, connected to your ERP system and your payment flows, and more focus should be on the exceptions, on the manual payments,
Exactly.
the not so normal payments.
Yeah.
Is
To
it?
give you an idea, maybe just numbers on that. I mean, what we can see, it's a benchmark and can vary. But we see that usually when clients, corporate clients, they do their own controls, it's going to take between half an hour and 1 hour overall of workload to validate a vendor, through the callbacks, through the paper check, anything that they're doing. And that is sometimes, not always flawless, to be honest. When you bring, 80, depending on the geographies that are covered, when you bring in, 70, 80, 90% automation, you bring in additional methods. Yeah, like, I don't know, in Trustpair, we take ownership on the callbacks, for example. So we do it ourselves, with our expertise on behalf of the clients. And plus, you still have a few remaining complex cases, as you mentioned. And in there, again, you bring in data, risk insights, a double validation workflow, one source of truth. then I mean, just to give you an idea, out of 10,000 checks that you might need to do every year for, let's say, an average corporate, you're gonna save up to 3 FTEs that you can reallocate to more value-added tasks, or that can even be hard savings if you guys are trying are looking for hard savings. So just want to stress out also the efficiency part. Some clients that we meet have processes in place, but first of all, sometimes they're flawless. So it's just a matter of when, they're going to be defrauded, to be honest, sometimes. And also there is the efficiency part. You can have shared service center and processes in place, but how much does it cost you? So that might be a question people ask.
No, really, most treasurers think in monetary terms and ROI and business cases. So you're really saying, Cyrille, there's a strong business case for fraud prevention platform, tool automation VoP that contains automation, because if it only eliminates 1, 2, 3, whatever number of frauds, that's money saved, right? Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, agree. Let's look a bit into the future, because we've talked about how the current VoP works and limitations, that it works okay-ish, but shouldn't be used as a standalone. And it was bit copy pasted from it works for single payments, not very well for bulk payments. So let's look into the future, and I think there's one question about it. How do you think VoP will evolve? Will it be improved? Also in combination of the banks, we see many opt-outs and move it to the pre-validation. Guillermo, looking at the time, maybe a short answer, and I want both of your opinions from a vendor perspective and treasury perspective. Guillermo, you first.
Yeah, I think we have to. There is the main challenge that the payment providers are facing now is the implementation of VoP itself. Well, maybe the Dutch banks they already are used to that. But the rest of Europe is struggling to implement the VoP solution in the deadline, which is October this year. So once this challenge it will be overcome, I think the next step will be how to treat the mass payments. We need to sit down. We need to find solutions. We need to decide if the opt-out option is interesting or not. But I think we need to sit down with banks, with payment providers, and vendors as well to decide how this is going to be implemented, because it's not that easy. And I know, because I've been involved in many forums on the creating already some challenges. But I positive on that. Everything will be we will always find a solution which will be beneficial for all the different parties. And I can tell you that in the corporate treasury side, we are not waiting for the solution without getting involved in the different alternatives to fix it. So we're really looking forward to it, and see that's the evolution of the confirmation of Payee, the verification of Payee, to provide mass payment solutions.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, to maybe give our view on that. I mean, what we're seeing right now is obviously you got VoP in the EU. You do also have similar initiatives across the world. So you have a similar one going up in Australia right now. We don't see anything, similar in the US right now, but it could happen, in the near future. So overall, what we're seeing is that data is becoming, banking data, I mean, is becoming more available across, the key economic region in the world. Obviously, as it is, name matching with all the imperfections that we went through, but there is definitely that trend. So to us, I mean, the value will really focus, we think, on three areas. The first one is how you provide the widest possible geographic coverage, because here we're talking obviously about the EU, maybe the US, Australia, but obviously, when you work with the corporate segments, these people have, vendors everywhere in the world. And you also need to be able to cover the vendors in the remote countries, because fraudster techniques are going to evolve, right? If, I mean, we know VoP doesn't eliminate fraud, even in Europe, so it's still going to be around. But I would say, best case, it's going to push fraudster to other jurisdictions, and they're going to be, attempting frauds from these jurisdictions. So it's really important for the corporate world, we think, to provide the comprehensive, geographic coverage. So one big question: how do you address the remote vendors? Another big axis of value, we think, is going to be on the remaining cases that we discussed. The remaining 5, 10, 20%, sometimes depends on the geography. How do you manage these when you don't have an obvious binary answer, right? You have a vendor, I don't know, in Uzbekistan, no banking data over there, no VoP. How to reach out through calling. If you try, I don't know, penny drop, vendor won't comply, and so on. So how do you manage these? So to us, where the value, and I mean, where the fraud is and where the value for us might be, is, on these remaining cases, how do you provide actionable information so that the client is in good position to take a secure and efficient decision? It doesn't take too much time, and they have all the cards in hands to take the right decision. And I think the third point is really, and I think that's one of the limitations with VoP as it is right now. I mean, I agree with Guillermo, it can only get better with time. One of the limitations is that it's not really embedded in the processes, right? In the corporate process, it's not very practical. It's not practical at the end of the payment chain. It's not embedded in the systems. It's not embedded in the processes. And obviously, you want these checks to be firmly, embedded in the existing processes. First of all, to prevent, effects like internal fraud, because the more you multiply, sources of truth, the more flows you have in terms of internal fraud or even external attacks. And also just to bring in efficiency in the process. We know the finance departments are under a lot of pressure these days to bring in efficiencies, and basically you want the process, and including the account validation process, to be as smooth and seamless as possible for the corporates.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we see the future on that vendor fraud bucket.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm also hearing a lot of uncertainty there, because the first point of contact is my bank, and how they deal with VoP and how they interpret the implementation. See a question there. Also with PSPs, and I do think PSPs are also part of the regulation, and they also have to implement VoP. Maybe short answer, Guillermo. Is it going to be messy in November afterwards, or what do you
No, I
think?
don't think so. I think it will. Of course, this is a new game. It will have some challenges, some problems at the beginning, of course, some misunderstanding. But I think we have examples in the Netherlands. We have examples in UK. Um, it's a question of time. Everything is gonna work well. I'm very positive on that, and that's gonna add an extra safety net. That's the most important thing. But don't rest on your laurels. VoP is not the holy grail. You need to think about how you protect your company, your treasury. Talk to companies like Trustpair to find solutions. Fraudsters, in the last report from UK Finance, we saw a more than 60% decrease on the main threat that we were facing corporate, which is the impersonation of invoices and change of bank account number from supplier, and that's good. But these people will come with other ideas. They will come with new threats. They will come with new scams. So be ready and don't rest on your laurels.
Okay, think that makes sense. Cyrille, we're out of time. We're already a bit over time. Any closing words, closing advice for the audience?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, again, a positive step. I'm just being a bit, just be wary with the term safety net. I mean, I think I see what you mean, Guillermo, by saying that. The way I think of it is more, it's one of the ingredients. safety net. We've had clients coming to us saying, shall I use, I mean, clients who use Trustpair, shall I use Trustpair in pre-validation and VoP as a last minute check at payments? I'm just being very clear on that. Don't do that, because you're going to get 90% validation upstream, and you're going to get a lower validation rates before the payment. So it's going to bring doubt and uncertainty, unnecessary doubt and uncertainty. So don't use it like that. If some of you, are using a solution like Trustpair and are considering using VoP like that, it's not efficient. It's going to bring a lot of, inefficiencies in your process. But I think I see what you mean, Guillermo, by saying safety. I mean, it's one of the ingredients. We see it as a first line of defense. We think it's going to be very positive for consumer, for small companies who will never, I mean, we are basically equipping, clients above 100 million euro revenue. So we know small companies are not really equipped on that. So we think it's going to be a great first line of defense. And yeah, let's see how it evolves in the coming years. But obviously, companies like Trustpair are here to obviously tailor the case and make it more accessible to the corporate world.
Yeah, and I think that's the key message. It's not the holy grail. It's going to help, but it's not going to achieve everything. It's a great starting point. Amazing. I learned some new things today, really, which I didn't knew. I still have many questions, even more questions while doing this discussion. So also addressing the audience, thanks for being here. If you have questions left or feel they are unanswered, Cyrille has offered our community to answer all the questions you have. So you can reach out to him, use this QR code or find him on LinkedIn. Trustpair has amazing resources about VoP, how to use it. You can read them, and they are happy to share them with you. So if you still have questions, reach out to Cyrille at Trustpair, and he will definitely answer all the questions you have left. That leaves me with thanking you, Cyrille, Guillermo. Thanks for sharing your expert knowledge here with the audience. Thanks for teaching us and making this session happen.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a nice
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Nice day.